Children over the age of 6 can have reasonably reliable identifications from lineups, provided that the perpetrator is actually in the lineup and the child had extended contact with the perpetrator. If this is somebody that has sexually molested them, of course, they're going to remember who they are. As long as he's in the lineup, they're going to be able to identify him. The problem is, of course, children a lot of times will not look at people's faces. They just naturally don't do that. They're, for one thing, they're too tall. They can't really look at their faces. Sometimes they just look at the rest of their body. So potentially they will identify an individual that is not, if they're not in the lineup, they'll identify somebody that is the closest to the person that has actually molested them or attacked them. Children are generally less accurate than adults when making an identification from a lineup in which the suspect is absent. They pick the person that is the closest to that select individual, so they have false positive errors as far as that is concerned. So if the perpetrator is not actually in the lineup, they might misidentify them. Now the problem, of course, is that, like I said before, a lot of children do not make facial contact. They don't look at people's faces. They look at, they're thinking of something else, evidently, when this is taking place. So a lot of times they don't really know what the person looked like. They can't tell you what color their eyes were. They might be able to, you have lots of dark hair. Well, what color is dark? I don't know. Well, I'm a blonde, so it wasn't white hair. So possible solutions to a child witness. Give the child the option to say not sure. Instructions informing them of the importance of making a correct decision, decrease guessing, and the incidence of false identifications. So you need to give them that information. Most child sexual abuse cases rest solely on the words of the victim because these cases typically lack physical evidence. And of course that's what we're dealing with the Kavanaugh Ford situation. It was not only, was it 35 years ago, but it was also a 17-year-old and a 15-year-old. So would it be statutory rape? If he actually sexually molested a 15-year-old, would that be statutory rape? It does depend on the state. It's a good point. It's an excellent point. It does depend on the state. He's 17, she's 15. Is that statutory rape?
Yes.
Potentially no, because he's underage.
Based on consent?
Yeah. Well, consent. Of course, it wouldn't be rape.
If the other person.
Yeah, it wouldn't be rape unless if it was consensual sex. And of course, if you have been even listening to what's going on, then and that's one of the questions. There are individuals that say it doesn't really matter what he did 35 years ago. He's not the same. All 17-year-old boys do that kind of stuff. Somebody said that on CNN. I was really surprised that people are saying all 17-year-old boys try to sexually molest 15-year-old girls. It was really kind of a shock. Anyway, this is going on right now. So we've got another week of this whole Kavanaugh Ford thing. It's not just going to be Kavanaugh Ford this time. They've already talked to the second eyewitness, the one that theoretically, that allegedly he exposed himself to at Yale University. So this is not over. We're not done with Brett Kavanaugh and Christine Blasey Ford. We've got another week of this, so we'll be listening to all of this stuff for another week and making funny videos, obviously.
Oh, did you show them that? Yeah.
There are concerns about whether children can be trusted to provide accurate details and disclose experiences of abuse. One of the questions that came up, and the president raised this question, was, well, why didn't she come out 35 years ago? If he really molested her 35 years ago, she should have said something at the time. What's wrong with that argument? What's wrong with that? we as psychologists, what do we think of that kind of an argument? Should she have come out 35 years ago?
Yes and no.
Yes, because she was molested and she should have said something about it. And no, what's the no?
Sometimes it takes a while for the person to process the abuse and to finally have the courage to talk about it. And she probably had no support. She probably did tell someone, but there was probably no support.
Actually, she didn't tell anybody until years later. And she had to go to counseling for it. And she told her counselor, of course, she told her husband, she and her husband have been to couples counseling, and this came out in couples counseling. Really kind of fascinating. It's not that common for somebody to admit that they've been sexually molested, as it turns out. Yeah, it's very common for them to try to repress the idea, to try to forget it, to try to forget that this has even happened. So for the president to say that was it a mistake? Yeah, it was not the smartest thing in the world to say.
Well, he probably sexually molested, you know.
He's probably a perpetrator.
I have no idea what it was. I don't know.
That's why he sees no wrong in it.
I'd rather not think about it. Our president being a molester. The first thing that you need to do when you're talking to a child is build rapport, and then encourage the child to provide details in their own words. The words that you have are not probably the words that they're going to use. If you're talking about modern, or if you're talking about the nomenclature of today, I'm sure that child's word for penis is not going to be penis. I'm guessing it's not going to be penis. It could be a lot of different things. When I was working in a rural health clinic in Oklahoma, a lady came in she came in for a gynecological examination. Of course, as a medical person, I call it a gynecological examination. She called it, she wanted somebody to look at her hoo-hoo. As odd as that was, of course, she was in her 80s, so if somebody's going to look at that portion of, has anybody ever heard that term before? Hoo-hoo? Okay. It was her hoo-hoo, so I thought that was a little odd. As I'm writing things down, I didn't have any idea why she came in, and she came in and she said, and of course I'd never talked to an 84-year-old woman about her vagina, so I'm writing all this stuff down, and she said it was her hoo-hoo, and I had to go ask the nurse what a hoo-hoo was, and she thought that was the funniest thing in the world, that I had never heard of it referred to as a hoo-hoo. Being in the military, you hear a lot of different terms for a lot of different things, but never the word hoo-hoo. Then I had to ask how to spell it, as strange as that is. So the child is also going to have different terms for portions of their body, portions of the other individual's body, and of course you need to allow them to say things the way that they say things. Right now, Kavanaugh comes up again. Unfortunately, when Kavanaugh was in high school, they did some things that we're trying to figure out what they are. One of them was Devil's Triangle. Another one was boofing. Boofing. Then there are other terms, and I'm not going to go into. Does anybody have any idea what any of this stuff is? Well, it really all depends on what they think it is. I mean, Devil's Triangle may mean one thing to one person and something else to somebody else. If you live in the Caribbean, of course, Devil's Triangle is that area where airplanes disappear and ships disappear. But that's not really what they were talking about in Maryland. They weren't really talking about going down to the Caribbean. Does anybody know what a Devil's Triangle is? Okay, and that's the question. Is it a drinking game, or is it a form of sexual intercourse? Any ideas? A drinking game? He said it's where you put 3 shots together. That's a Devil's Triangle. You arrange them in a triangle? Really? Okay.
I don't drink.
There you go. So you don't have no idea. If it has to do with sex, it certainly doesn't have to do with 3 shots. Okay, it has to do with 3 people, obviously. And who are those 3 people is the other question. Boofing, you probably have heard of boofing. Boofing is where you take a tampon, you soak it in alcohol, like vodka. I know, and then you insert it in areas of your body that would accept a tampon, of course. If you're male, then there's only one area that you can, well, I don't. Okay, anyway, that's known as boofing. Sadly, okay. I know, it gets you drunk faster, so there you go. That's always positive. Getting as drunk as fast as you possibly can. It also is being absorbed through the mucous membrane, so it's it very rapidly gets into your bloodstream. I know, so if you want to get drunk really fast, you don't drink the stuff, you just stick it up. Or whatever, I mean, if you've got someplace else to stick it up, go ahead and do that. And that has to do with boofing. As strange as that may seem. So anyway, so you need to use their terms and you need to get them to define those terms. Because there will be an argument in court as to whether Devil's Triangle has to do with the Caribbean or it has to do with a 3-way with 2 males and a female. After this, investigators may ask specific questions about the event, although the children are less accurate with specific questions. This structured protocol discourages the use of suggestive questions, and you have to stay away from suggestive questions because that is leading and that is getting the child to say things that the child didn't mean to say or didn't want to say or potentially wouldn't have said. So you can't lead the child. You have to allow the child to give you the information yourself, right, Arlene? Isn't this the way that you do it? Nothing can possibly be leading. Otherwise, you're telling that individual what to say. And the child, of course, wants to give you what you want, so they'll tell you that, yeah, tell you anything that you want. So you can't ask them a question such as, he touched you, didn't he? That's a yes or no question, and of course the child, it's not the child's idea, it's your idea, and the child is either saying yes or no. So you can't be suggestive at all. You have to allow the child to give you their narrative by themselves. Children are less accurate with specific versus general questions because specific questions ask for memories of events that the child may never have encoded or may have forgotten. And you have to remember that what is important to you may not be important to that child. There was a case in, this was about 10 years ago. There was a case where they found a videotape of a man just really having a really violent sex with a child. Turned out that she was an 18-month-old. The man was never shown in the video, only his penis and the child. So it was a sex tape of an 18-month-old and an adult male. They found this tape out in the middle of the desert. That's theoretical, of course. This guy brought it into the cops, and he said he found it out in the desert. And he gave it to the police, and the police looked at it, and everybody was just shocked at the explicitness of this tape, the horror of this child being sexually molested by this male. And of course, they had no way of identifying the male because they didn't know what his face looked like. They barely knew what his body looked like. They only knew what the little girl looked like. But of course, how in the world do you identify somebody like that? So what they did, they looked at the clothes that she was wearing, and they determined that these were clothes from Kmart, and Kmart only had that style out for 2 or 3 weeks. That's the way it usually goes. If you ever go back to Walmart to buy the dress that you saw last week, it's going to be wrong. Yeah, they tend to be relatively regional. This is in Las Vegas. And what they determined was that it was in Las Vegas It was an outfit that was sold in Las Vegas, but not in Los Angeles, not in Phoenix. It was being sold at a select amount of time. So because of that, they were able to go back in the records of Kmart, and they were able to determine a group of individuals that it might potentially have been. They took that information and they tracked the little girl down. And then when they tracked the little girl down, they questioned the mother. The mother said, "Oh, I allowed my next door neighbor to watch my kid for an hour and a half. When I had to go to work one night, they called me into work, and my neighbor volunteered to watch my child. Afterwards, I didn't notice any problems. She didn't want to take a bath or something, you know, it was really kind of strange. She had no clue that this guy had molested her child and videotaped it. So then they figured out who the guy was, and he took off across country. And they caught him in Texas, which is not the best place to be caught if you've been doing something horrible like that. Anyway, everything turned out okay. Okay, so then they asked the little girl. She's only 18 months old. She had no memory whatsoever, no recollection of any of that stuff that had ever taken place. She was only 18 months old. She was pre-linguistic to a major extent. So she couldn't put words to what happened to her, and since she couldn't put words to it, she just forgot it. It wasn't important. It wasn't important enough to, I don't know, develop words for what happened to her. She had no recollection whatsoever of what had happened to her. Which is good news, kind of, but you certainly couldn't use this child to convict this individual. Of course, they already had the videotape which convicted the individual. Okay, so they're less accurate with specific general questions. The child may answer a question that she or he does not fully understand in order to be cooperative, and of course this is a problem as well. You have to put the question in words that the child will understand. So if you use the word penis, if you use the word vagina, they will probably not understand unless their father is a gynecologist or whatever. Have you ever seen that movie Kindergarten Cop, where the kid keeps popping up and saying, boys have a penis and girls have a vagina? Other than that, they're not going to have a clue. Specific questions can easily become suggestive, and you have to be very careful of not leading the child. The more, if you lead them, of course, then they will give you false testimony. A sizable number of children experience multiple incidents of sexual abuse. Repeated events enhance memory for aspects of the incident that are held constant but impair the ability to recall details that vary. Prosecutors must provide evidence that reflect details of separate incidents in order to file multiple charges. So if the individual has been molesting the child over a period of time, there are a number of different molestations, then they will want to charge the individual with several different multiple charges. And of course, prosecutors will usually pile on. In other words, they'll want to charge them not only with child sexual molestation, but also with sodomy. With sodomy probably is the one thing. So they'll need to determine if that actually occurred, if they had sex other than genital sex or oral sex or whatever. They'll need to determine that in order to get multiple charges against the individual. If they experience multiple incidents of maltreatment, children may be subjected to repeated interviews. Research has shown both negative and positive effects of repeated interviews on children's memory and suggestibility. The reminiscence effect can explain why multiple interviews may be useful. You'll get different information. So they may think of the first time it happened as one thing, and then the second time they will need a separate interview session when they talk about that. Because remember, these are children and they really don't have desires themselves. So for that reason, when different things happen to them, you will have to walk them through the different incidents. And of course, you wouldn't want to do that in one session. If there had been 5 or 6 different incidences and they were having sex in a different manner, then you couldn't just generalize it and say, well, talk about this. They would need to walk them through the different incidences. Does all that make sense? Okay. And that's one of the reasons for the multiple interviews. A 14-year-old girl informed her mother that the mother's former partner had sexually assaulted her. There was evidence that the young girl was telling the truth. An interview with the girl using open-ended questions disclosed 3 separate episodes of abuse. A second interview disclosed another episode and more corroborating details. And this is the way it works. This is the way it generally works. Of course, she's 14 years old, so she's gone through, she's at least started puberty, so potentially she has ideas about what sex is all about. So this individual will be a little bit easier to get information from her than it would if she were 4 years old and she has no sexual understanding or desires herself, but a 14-year-old might be different. In cases like this, a lot of times what we get is mom doesn't believe the daughter. So what's wrong with mom? Why doesn't she believe her daughter? What's wrong with, is the daughter a liar? Are all 14-year-old girls liars? So why doesn't mom believe her daughter? The boyfriend says it didn't happen, and the 14-year-old says it did happen. So why not believe the daughter?
Maybe just her way of avoiding it because it's 2 people that she's conflicted with emotionally.
Okay.
She doesn't want
Yeah, she doesn't want
So-
to believe it.
Well, but the daughter's her own flesh and blood. I know it happens. Why does it happen? It happens way too frequently.
Yes.
Yeah. So this 14-year-old has been molested by this lady's boyfriend, and she won't say anything about it. So it never comes to light. Even though she told mom that it happened. What's going on here?
Mom's probably dependent on the guy for like emotional support or
Emotional
even
support?
more financial support.
Financial support?
Could
So
she
she
be
doesn't wanna do
jealous
that.
of the
Yeah, jealousy is
daughter?
Jealousy
Jealousy.
could be that too.
Wow. So maybe it's a rarity that moms actually disclose this information. Sometimes mom will go with the boyfriend and dump the daughter.
Yeah.
Yeah. We see that too.
A lot.
Is love really that strong? Or is it codependency?
It's codependency.
It's probably codependency. You're probably right. Mom can't stand not to be loved by somebody.
Yeah.
And
So the mom usually has issues herself too. That's why she can't be there for her daughter.
potentially. Okay, so now we know that this can be an issue, especially with moms and daughters and boyfriends or whatever. And the only time mom will, the only time mom will dump the, will actually think that the boyfriend molested the daughter is when he dumps her. Yeah. Then all of a
When
sudden.
all of a sudden that cloud is gone.
Exactly.
Or unless she gets hurt herself by him.
I'm
Or
sorry?
Nothing. Nothing.
She might get impregnated by the boyfriend. Whoops. That has happened as
And
well.
that's sad to see.
And mom gets jealous.
Yeah, and she remains that way.
Repeated interviewing is necessary when an alleged victim is too distressed to provide useful information initially, when victims fail to disclose abuse that is later documented by medical examinations or suspect confessions, or when other new evidence comes to light. A lot of times the other evidence, broken nose, in this case she's got a broken nose. This is the day after she was punched in the face. Tomorrow, both of her eyes are going to be black. This is right after she got punched. And you can see where the break is. The break is right here. Yeah, she got punched in the mouth and in the nose, but he caught her right on the nose, assuming it was a male. Could have been a female. Anyway, okay. So if you saw somebody that looked like this, of course, then you would know that something happened. And for that reason, of course, they go in to see the doctor. The doctor would put just a piece of tape across their nose and their eyes would turn all black. But because of that information that we have, now all of a sudden we need to find out what happened. Okay. So a lot of times they don't want to disclose any information at all. They ran into a door. Everybody's running into doors. Oh man, when I worked in the emergency room, I swear, anybody that came in with a black eye or a busted nose, they ran into a door. Doors evidently jump out and hit people sometimes. Okay. I know, it was so irritating. Wives were never hit by their husbands, they always ran into doors. And of course, sometimes they would not just run into a door, but they would do it again. They would like hit it on one side, then they'd hit it on the other side. I mean, it was so odd. But they would swear that they got hit by a door. It was open, I didn't even know it was there. Children are sometimes reluctant to disclose abusive experiences and may even deny them when they are asked. Research does suggest that many children can remember significant details of abuse experiences and, if asked directly, can describe them quite accurately. And usually it's because it's an emotional situation. They were upset when it happened, so they continue to be upset. These kinds of experiences will follow the child throughout their lives. They will remember the details of what happened.
I think it hurts them more when they can't talk about it and they don't get confirmation for their experience.
Right.
You know, coming out of a situation like that, you know, with my little ones,
Sure.
they would recount incidents that I wouldn't even remember, things that I've repressed. You know, so it'll be like, Mom, do you remember when that happened? You know,
Right.
like, no, I don't. You know, what happened? You know, as painful as it was and as painful as it is still is to this day.
Sure.
You know, just listening to it and having them talk about it has actually really helped us a lot and even bond better as a family.
Right.
Yeah.
The more you talk about it, the more you deal with it actually in your
Yeah,
mind.
and that way they don't carry that baggage around with them
Exactly.
as they get older.
Exactly.
Yeah. And that's why I try to tell moms, you know, like, you gotta let them talk about it. You know, you may not remember, but they sure as heck do.
Oh, sure.
You know, and if you deny that they don't, what they said isn't true, or
Right.
you don't confirm it, their memory, or at least be on their side, and being in that instance when you weren't, you know,
Right.
they're gonna come back and not feel the same way as you,
Exactly.
and not gonna trust you no more.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So the Kavanaugh situation comes up once again. So here we have a 15-year-old young lady that was theoretically sexually molested. She had had one beer that night. She said the other two individuals in the room had a lot to drink. She was the one that was molested. She's the one that seems to remember it, and they don't seem to remember it at all. At least one of them has testified that Brett would never do anything like that, and the other one has testified that he's never molested women. However, what's the probability that everybody's telling the truth? That Kavanaugh doesn't remember it, Judge doesn't remember it, but Ford does. Is that possible?
Yes, because everyone has their own interpretation of their reality.
Sure. And two were really drunk.
So their reality wasn't even reality.
May have been completely different. As strange as that may seem. So if it's the male that did it, well, obviously in this case there were two males. Which is the other definition of devil's trying. Two males and a female. Okay, that's the definition. Devil's trying. Sorry, it's not a drinking game. Or maybe it is, I don't know. But that's the definition of a devil's trying.
It's definitely not enough for a couple.
Well, it's two males, so that's what, they are the devils. Okay. A subgroup of abuse victims either forgets abuse or remembers it poorly, and the question is, why do they not remember it very well? And the answer, of course, is that people cope with maltreatment by trying to suppress, inhibit, or ignore those thoughts about it. They weaken or even eliminate memories of those experiences over time. And of course, one of the positive things about individuals who have gone into combat, a lot of times they don't remember what happened. They remember little pieces of what happened, but not specifically what happened. When you're in that situation, of course, you're trying to close your eyes, you're trying to keep from seeing things. Of course, you want to see everything because you certainly don't want somebody to attack you and not be able to know what they are. But the reality is you try to repress all of this information. I don't remember bad things. I try not to remember bad things. I know. Is that a good thing or is it a bad thing? Well, as far as PTSD is concerned, it's a really good thing.
Brain protecting
Yeah.
itself, yeah.
But if somebody asked me, well, you know, what happened on January 3rd of 1972, I would say, wait a minute, where was I January 3rd? Where was I? I was in training. Okay. I would say I have no clue. I can't remember. Most of the military was a bad joke that I can't remember. That's good. Though most child maltreatment cases end in admissions of guilt or plea bargains, tens of thousands of children, often preschoolers, must testify in abuse trials each year. The reality is that if it's a he said she said situation, normally it will either end in either they would admit that they did something bad, which doesn't happen all that often, but usually it ends in a plea bargain. Okay, so you won't admit that it happened, but the kid said that it did, and the mom said that you were this kind of a person. So we're not going to charge you with child abuse. We'll charge you with something far less serious than that. Especially if it had to do with a sexual problem, with a sexual attack. If we convict you of sexually assaulting somebody, then you go on that list. You go on a list, and you'll not be able to find jobs in the future. So potentially what you'll do is you'll plea it down. You'll plea it down so that we charge you with physical abuse rather than sexual molestation. And of course, if you're convicted of sexual molestation, you go on the sex offenders list, and now you got a problem, because some places you won't be able to live. You won't be able to get certain jobs and whatnot. So people will plea these things down, and usually that's exactly what happens, because it's between that little kid and this older man. And if we can plea it down, then he'll may be able to find a job. But then again, he may do it again. That's the problem. So maybe we do need to put him on the sex offenders list. But of course, we can't get a conviction otherwise. So at least we have a conviction where he's sexually or he physically abused somebody. What is the effect on the child of having to discuss these issues in court? Talking about victimization in a public setting may increase the trauma for many children, although it may be therapeutic for some. And this is, of course, something else that we saw on Thursday when Christine Blasey Ford testified. We saw how painful it was for her to testify. She's been repressing these thoughts and these ideas for 35 years, and here she had to go before the entire country. It was the most watched event in American history. There were people watching it on airplanes. They were watching her testimony. They were watching his rebuttal to her testimony. This was the most, so everybody knows what happened to Christine Blasey Ford. These are ideas that she's been repressing for an extended length of time. So you can imagine that she's going to have to go back to counseling. This is an ugly situation. Exactly. So all of a sudden, we've got other women that are testifying against Brett Kavanaugh. These are also women who have been repressing these ideas, potentially. The lady who he was drunk and he exposed himself to her at a party at Yale University the next year after what potentially happened to Blasey Ford. So of course all of these things are very difficult for the individual, especially if they are a child. Of course, they're going to have to relive the whole incident. But even these women who were older, were more mature, for them it is traumatizing as well. It's re-traumatizing. This is one of the reasons why over 60%, what is it, 65, 66% of women don't say anything because they don't want to relive this incident. They want to forget it. They want to put it off in their brain. If they could, they would reach into their brain and pull that chunk of memory out and throw it away so that they wouldn't ever have to think about it again. And of course, that's one of the reasons why only about somewhere in the 20 to 30% range of women actually will go to the police after this has happened. How do jurors perceive child witnesses? In mock jury studies, child eyewitnesses are generally viewed as less credible than adult eyewitnesses. Okay, so this lady's 15 years old. Is she a child witness? Christine Blasey Ford, when she was molested by allegedly by Brett Kavanaugh, was 15. Was she a child?
She's an adolescent, and she's a child still.
Yeah, she was a child. So they find them as less credible than adult eyewitnesses. In cases of child sexual abuse, younger victims are viewed as more credible than adults or as adolescents. Probably because these jurors suspect that younger children lack the sexual knowledge to fabricate an allegation. And that's probably true. Note that jurors can recognize the effects of suggestive questioning. And of course, you can get false positives from a suggestive questioning. So you have to be very careful. You need a professional to do it. One of the reasons that they brought in the female prosecutor to question Christine Blasey Ford, the Republicans did, as interesting as that is, was because they were afraid that men, especially old white guys, questioning an individual about sexual molestation wouldn't look very good. So they had a female prosecutor come in. And actually, at one point, she turned. At one point, she was supposed to be questioning her, trying to find out if she was telling the truth. And at one point, she actually called her the victim. Once she did that, it was all over with. They pulled the plug on her and they wouldn't let her question her anymore because she had admitted that she thought that she was the victim. Judges allow various courtroom modifications to protect children from the potential stress of testifying. The placement of a screen in front of the defendant has been used so that child witness cannot see him or her while testifying. So they will cover the individual that is the plaintiff. The Supreme Court later ruled that defendant's rights to confront his accuser was not outweighed by the necessity of protecting the victims of sexual abuse. And this was in a case, Coy versus Iowa, in 1988. So in other words, the child had to look at their accuser, or the individual that had molested them, during their testimony, according to Coy versus Iowa in 1988. Oh, but we're not done. Now that can be intimidating because this individual may have physically abused them and threatened them with physical harm if they ever said anything about it. So here they are, they're looking this guy in the eye. Will they be able to testify against them? And the answer is not as much. But we're not done. In the case of Maryland versus Craig in 1990, the court upheld a law permitting a child to give testimony in a different part of the courthouse and had the testimony transmitted to the courtroom via closed-circuit television. The law applied to cases where the child was likely to suffer significant emotional distress by being in the presence of the defendant. And if you remember in the Kavanaugh Ford case, she said, "I will testify as long as I don't have to be in the same room as Brett Kavanaugh." So that was part of the deal for her to testify. Now, of course, they could have been played politics, and they could have said, no, if you're going to testify, then you have to testify in front of in front of Kavanaugh. But they didn't do that, and that was probably good for everybody because we heard her testimony. Did anybody watch it?
Heard it. I heard it.
Just the highlights.
Just highlights.
Just highlights of it? I wasn't able to watch it either, I was in class, but
Do they have it like on YouTube or something?
it's kind of long.
Really long, it's like 2
And it's
hours.
real emotional, so if you get emotional, if you might cry, she cries during the thing. If you want to watch Kavanaugh, he cried when he was defending himself. So there you go, you get to hear both of them cry, it's really kind of exciting. And yes, it was the same way for me, I wasn't able to watch it because I was in class, but I saw highlights of it. And I'll tell you what, it's really hard for me to listen to her, because her voice keeps breaking. And she cried during the testimony, so it's really tough to listen to.
It probably hurts her more being an adult now and retelling about what happened to her when she was younger, because now she has a different view
Right.
of, kind of like feeling really bad and not able to protect herself then, and now she can protect herself. So that's probably why she has such a difficult time, I think.
Or can she protect herself?
No, she still can't. That's why
That's why it was so hard for
that's why
her.
it was so hard.
Right.
That poor lady, she would have to go through like a lifetime of counseling.
Well, she's already been through a lifetime.
And she's gonna go through it again. That's,
She's a psychologist.
Oh, cool.
Isn't that interesting?
Oh.
I wonder why she went into psychology. Physician, heal thyself. Possibly that was one of the reasons. But she didn't go into counseling psychology. She's not a counselor. She's a research psychologist. So she teaches the same thing that Dr. Wolf and Dr. Kine teach. She teaches those types of classes. Research methods and statistics, those are her areas.
that
They-
might just be like her way of trying to make sense.
Well, it's the non-emotional side of psychology. It's all numbers and formulas and whatnot. Exactly. So it's not the
The fun
nitty-gritty,
side.
the
Just
trenches.
kidding.
You don't have to get down in
The
the
fun
trenches.
side. I'm just kidding.
You are kidding. I know you're kidding. It isn't the fun side, okay? It's the boring
It's like the
side.
best side.
But, I mean, if you have this problem and you want to stay on the boring
I'm
side,
just kidding. I'm just kidding.
you get an F for today, okay? It's the hard part. Anyway, okay, so they realized that this was really traumatizing the children, so 2 years later, they decided that children could testify in closed-circuit television. The law applied to cases where the child was likely to suffer significant. Okay, we're going to talk about that. They later modified the Coy case, of course, and that's what we were just talking about. Craig modified Coy. If you're a defense attorney and you're defending a guy that says he didn't molest somebody, you want to upset that child as much as you possibly can. Can you imagine being that kind of a jackass? That you would defend somebody that has done that? But the law says that they deserve a lawyer just like everybody else does. Children give more detailed statements when allowed to testify on closed-circuit television, and children also feel less nervous when allowed to testify outside the courtroom, and because of this, of course, they don't feel threatened. That's the problem with testifying in a courtroom, especially where the individual potential molester is sitting across from them. That's what it means that you can face your accuser. However, children who testify via closed-circuit television are viewed less positively than children who testify in open court. Of course, you don't get to see them, you see them on television. They're sitting beside somebody that's making them feel better, and for that reason, you don't hear them cry, you don't see their facial expressions as well, and you also don't see who's beside them. This is like if you're around a dog that has been trained to do something. Of course, the trainer is always outside the camera range, so you can't see. Is there somebody actually manipulating the child off camera. That's always a possibility with closed-circuit television. At least that's what's in people's minds.
Isn't that kind of something that Hillary Clinton did in her early days? She had to defend a child like this, and that's what came up in 2016
Yes.
when she was running for president.
Right. Yeah, and they just jumped all over her for defending that individual. But, of course, that's part of,
Part of her study.
yeah, that's part of jurisprudence. Somebody has to defend that individual. And it can't be the Weasley little guy that forgets to, never shaves his lip and picks his nose during trials. It's not always that guy. Okay, so what are other modifications that they have done to help child witnesses? They provide an advocate who can familiarize the child with courtroom settings. They permit a support person to sit with the child during testimony. They make structural changes to the courtroom. In Iowa, my wife works as a CASA volunteer. CASA volunteers are individuals that get cases like this, and they actually go to court with the children. They're also advocates for the child in cases where the parent has lost custody of the child, they're in a foster care situation. So that's her job, and it's a horrible, horrible job. She's a volunteer, so she doesn't get paid for it. But it's a terrible job, as you can imagine, because adults never tell you the truth, and sometimes the kids don't tell you the truth. She had one family that she was working with where the older daughter wanted to smoke pot all the time. She was 15, I think. Yeah. She was having all kinds of trouble with that child from the family, but all the other kids in the family were fine. Daughter was crawling out the window at night and going off to parties. The older one, the 15-year-old. Really? Oh, it's my wife. Hello? Okay, I'll take care of it. Okay, thanks. Okay, thanks. Yeah, bye. Shit. Oh, sorry. My dogs are out, and they're over by the dormitory.
Jailbreak.
I know, my kids
Get
are
it
out.
before maintenance does, and take them out there.
Shoot them?
Yeah, that's what they do. They
Oh
don't even
my
bother to take them over to a no-kill shelter in Wecon. And I know there's people that, you can take them in for free, you know, you don't even have to donate, and still they just shoot them.
You know, if they haven't shot Clay yet, do you know Clay?
He's at my house every day.
Oh my God. If they haven't shot Clay yet, they're not going to shoot my dogs.
As long as they have collars on, and
Yeah,
as long as they
yeah.
know it's yours, but if it's
Yeah.
anybody else in the community, I don't think they care.
Blow their brains
They
out.
don't care.
Well, they may be over there with that dog without a collar, so we'll see what happens.
They seemed to do that last week, that's why I'm saying that.
Well, they shot somebody?
Not like the dog.
Oh,
They captured like 2 of them, and I don't know,
what happened to them?
yeah.
Well, let's pretend they're out at.
Let's pretend they're at a no-kill shelter.
Yeah. Well, there is no-kill shelter on campus.
Mexico. Yeah, and we can take them over there, because Margaret Mayer made that possible
know.
for us to do so, but no one adheres to it.
Who wants to do that?
Yeah, right? I do all the time, that's why I'm saying that.
Emotionally motivated forgetting is called repression. The forgotten events are thought to be so traumatizing that individuals bury them deeply in their unconscious, and of course this is known as repression. Repression, so we repress ideas. If we've done anything bad, we potentially repress it. And maybe that's what has happened with Kavanaugh. He's repressed all of these memories of molesting people. Of course he can. Of course it's in his yearbook, so. And he's the one that wrote his yearbook entry. And he put all this stuff in there. What an idiot. These repressed memories sometimes stay forgotten unless and until they are spontaneously recalled by exposure to some aspect of the general experience
How much time? Okay, we're good.
Damn, my dogs are out. Shit. Well, maybe they'll just go back home. I'll bet you when I go home,
They'll be.
they'll be home. Yeah, I'll bet you they'll be home. So it's a good thing my wife called.
They probably have a tracker on you.
My daughter-
Yeah, their schedule memorized.
Yeah.
Well, they were here, last Tuesday, they were here. And and they were still in the parking lot when I got out of class. So I took them back to the FOB, the sixplex, and then I got in my car, and they followed my car. Of course, I had to drive all the way out, all the way around. So my dogs are racing me home.
Your rest dogs.
The male beat me home, but the female didn't. She's slower.
What color are your dogs?
What color?
Yeah.
One's beige, almost white. He's got a orange collar on, a shocking orange collar. The other's black and white. She's got no ears. Somebody clipped her ears.
They see it. They come by and play too sometimes.
I try to.
I had a picture of my Facebook with that. I may not be smart, but I know where A2 is. Because Clay will come up and it sounds like he throws his entire body into the door.
He does. He's
Yeah.
terrible. He climbs over my fence.
He knows how to open doors. So if your door is unlocked, he'll just open it and come right on in and be like, hey, you got some food?
Exactly. He's looking for food. That's what. My dogs won't eat their food, and so they're not really looking for food. They're just looking
They
for
just
food.
want to go somewhere.
Well, they're looking for food. They want somebody to pet them.
And we got a playground right in the middle of our complex, so they get enough attention there from all the kids. And all the kids have like their own names for them. It's so funny because they'll respond to those names.
Oh, was that right?
You should put a GoPro on your dog.
Let
See
it
where
track
he
it.
goes.
Yeah.
I don't want to know. Okay.
Goodness.
Some suggest that repression has never been proven to exist, and that the inability to remember traumatic events can be explained by ordinary forgetting. Okay, so repression is an idea that Freud came up with. Can we experiment and find out if it exists? No. I mean, what kind of an experiment are we going to do? Are we going to give you an idea and then force you, try to get you to repress it? If I tell you not to think of the blue hippopotamus, guess what's going to happen next? Blue hippopotamus, blue hippopotamus. Don't think of blue hippopotamus. That's the thing you're going to be thinking about. Okay, so we can't prove that repression actually does exist. But we know that people don't remember things. We know that this happened, but they don't remember it. So did they just forget it, or are they forcing it out of their memory? That's the question. So we don't know that it actually exists. Freud said that it existed, but there's a lot of people that don't like Freud. But we do know that dissociation does exist. A related unconscious process is dissociation, in which victims of abuse or other traumas are thought to escape the full impact of an experience by psychologically detaching themselves from that idea. Dissociative identity disorder is this way. Somebody with dissociative identity disorder, the individual becomes different personalities, and those different personalities are better able to deal with traumatic events. Somebody is a 4-year-old girl and she's being sexually molested by her uncle. Potentially when she is being molested, she takes on a different personality so that the 4-year-old personality doesn't have to deal with the trauma. So she takes on a new personality. Potentially she'll take on a personality that can actually protect her from the uncle or from whoever is molesting her. Does all that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
But we're not exactly sure if this exists either, dissociative identity disorder. We've seen lots of movies about it, Frankie and Alice. What's the one about the guy that crawls on the ceiling? Split. Oh my God, that's scary. It's a scary movie. Yeah.
I believe in that.
But the question is, does it actually exist? I mean, it's very similar to Freud. Freud has come up with a theory, and people have repeated the theory, but we can't prove it. We have no way of proving it. We do have films of Alice Black and, what is it? What was that lady? She had two different distinct personalities. Anyway, can we prove it? Well, we've got that one on film. But we also have Sybil, and Sybil admitted at the end of her life that she made it all up and that she was just acting, even though we have her on tape. So the question is, does this really exist? When I was getting my PhD, I had a professor, and this was his specialty, dissociative identity disorder. And of course, he told us that it did exist. He'd seen it over and over and over again. But the reality is, the only time you'll ever see it, or the only time you would ever see it, is if somebody was in a traumatic situation and they change personalities on you. So if you have somebody coming in for counseling, the probability is that even if they have dissociative identity disorder, they will always show you the same personality. They will never change personalities on you because they're in a safe situation. There's no reason for that alternative personality to come out.
Would those individuals have like predispositions for other mental issues such as schizophrenia for them to make it a little bit easier to
No,
maybe go into that, or?
no. Usually this is the problem that they have. And we don't see anything else in them. What we do see is a very intelligent person.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And if you can imagine.
Would that kind of, I don't know, I'm just thinking about Asperger's syndrome too as well.
Sure.
Would that kind of be a part of this association?
It is. They do dissociate.
And they have that physical change as well?
And they have a normal dissociation.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know about the physical change. Some of these individuals, you remember Frankie and Alice, she had to put on glasses when she was some of her
And she was
personalities.
nearsighted, yeah.
And she was left-handed, she was right-handed almost with all of her personalities, but then she was left-handed with the white
With
lady.
the white lady.
Yeah. Which is kind of interesting. They change their prescription, their eyes change. Most of the reports of repressed and recovered memories involve claims of child sexual abuse. The theory is that individuals suffered sexual or physical abuse as children, often at the hands of a trusted adult, like the uncle, like a father, a brother potentially. Repressed or dissociated any memory of these horrors for many years, recovered their memories of the abuse when it was psychologically safe to do so. In other words, when they were able to protect themselves. Physically able to protect themselves. I have a friend, colleague, former colleague at Ashford University. He's got a new girlfriend, and this is kind of scary because his new girlfriend he's tall and slender. He's like 6'4", and he weighs 150, 160 pounds. I mean, he's really, really skinny, okay? Yeah, he's so skinny. He looks like a skeleton, like Ichabod Crane walking around. Anyway, he's got a new girlfriend, and she's gorgeous. She's gorgeous. But the thing about his girlfriend is that she's been sexually molested twice. Once she was kidnapped in a similar manner to Christine Blasey Ford. She was invited to a party. She went to the party. Turned out it was just between her and another guy, and and he kidnapped her and held her prisoner for an extended length of time, being a couple days, when she became his sex slave. So that was one incident, and the other was another similar situation where she was at a house party and she was gang raped in a similar manner to what they were talking about. Anyway, so now what she has done is that she takes, she knows jiu-jitsu and taekwondo, and she knows the one from Brazil, the kicking one. Okay, yeah, so she knows all of these ways of defending herself. I don't know, I can't remember what it is. I know, she has all these ways, and her new boyfriend is the skinny, I mean, this guy can't really.
Breaking in half.
He can't even, this computer is heavy for him. You know, I had to carry his stuff for him. I mean, that's how wimpy this guy was. But as funny as that is. But so now she's got a boyfriend that she can break over her knee.
That's too crazy, because Data, not too long ago, actually posted it on Facebook. I was making breakfast and I had made myself a cup of tea. You know, coming from a domestic violence situation, you have
Right.
PTSD that follows you.
Right.
So he was still sleeping and I didn't hear him get up. So I all of a sudden felt a presence behind me and
Right.
I saw a shadow behind me. So and I was getting my cup of tea too, because it was done, and I was gonna turn around and, you know, and so my instinct was to splash him and beat him with that cup. And then I saw, and then I screamed, I was like, oh, I almost just killed you just now, you know, and my adrenaline was still pumping, that when I grabbed him, I actually hurt him right here and pinched a nerve, and he has a bruise now. But yeah, I tell him not to sneak up.
I've seen your significant other. He can handle that bruise. I
Yeah,
think.
he can handle that bruise, but he was like, ah! I was like, ah, you scared me. And that's the thing with me, like, I don't like people sneaking up behind me, like, I'm
What's
always.
kind of mean to do that.
Well, he thought he was gonna, and he said he stopped because he was gonna come over and hug me, but he saw me getting that cup, so he's like, just stood back, and right when he was gonna say something, that's when I turned around and nearly took him out.
He needs to think before he acts.
Yeah, that's why he's all, so now he's like, I'm awake, I'm walking around the house now. Okay, cool.
My current wife, when she was young, her brother was a mean SOB, and he would hide in dark places and jump out and scare her, which is stupid. I mean, it's not the same thing as being molested or anything. But to this day, I do not do anything like that. I try to make sure that she
My
knows
kids
where
know
I
how
am
to
at
do
all
that
times.
too.
'Cause she might.
Because my kids will sometimes come out of a corner without me knowing, and I'll be like, oh, it's like, don't do that. So it's like, oh, I
Well,
can't stand
she's
it.
military trained, and something could kick in and she could just knock all my teeth out. Or her favorite is, and she's done this once, she did this once, she hit me right here
Yeah.
with the side of her hand. If
Yeah.
she'd been like an inch higher, she would have broken my
Yeah.
voice box and broken my esophagus and killed me.
Yep.
She hit me right there. So my current wife almost killed me. My first wife almost killed me, but she meant to.
But this one didn't.
This one didn't really mean to. And it was, you know, I thought she knew I was there, but
Yeah,
turned
that's
around
the
and
thing.
I mean, it was just instinctual. Sometimes repressed memories are recovered only after a person participates in psychotherapy that applies techniques such as hypnosis, age regression, guided visualization, diary writing, or therapist instructions to help clients remember. Diary writing is really kind of interesting. They ask you to go back in time and keep a diary of what happened when you were 14 years old. And of course, slowly these memories will come back, and so you will keep this diary of what happened in your past. It's not complete, of course. You can't go, oh, October 3rd, you know, this is what I was doing. But you can remember, usually you will remember seasons, yeah, and you'll remember holidays. You'll remember important events, and of course you have to force yourself to remember these things, and eventually, of course, you will remember something traumatic potentially that happened. And sometimes therapists will just try to help them remember. Many researchers and therapists question the validity of these memories because in reality it's almost like writing a book. So the question is, how much of it is real and how much of it is fabricated? Are you just trying to make things interesting? I mean, most days if you wrote down what happened to you today, you know, you tried to kill your husband, other than that, probably most days you don't do something.
No.
Nothing exciting happens. I went home and I watched television. And then tomorrow I went home and I watched television. You know, those kinds of things are what happen to you every day. I taught class, nobody laughed at any of my jokes, and then I went home and watched television. That's usually what would be in my diary. The same thing over and over and over again. And when you're a kid, of course, you're bored to death because you're looking for something to change, something exciting to happen, and nothing exciting ever happens unless you force it to happen. Given the right set of circumstances, people can create memories of incidents that never occurred. Psychologists have been able to implant false memories by enlisting the help of family members who suggest to the adult research participants that these relatives recall a fabricated event. My mother used to, and I told you guys this, my mother used to call me you little shit. And it wasn't all the time, right? It's not like, she never called me by my name. And I think I explained the fact that my mother hated my name. So why the hell did she name me what she named me? Well, that she thought my dad liked the name. It turned out my dad hated the name. So they gave me a name that both of them didn't like. So while I was growing up, they really didn't call me by my name very often. They usually called me, hey you, or it was in a string of, there were 6 of us, and they'd say all the names, that kind of a thing. But my sister doesn't remember my mother ever calling me little shit, even though my mother called me little shit, I don't know, once a day or whatever. But my sister has repressed that memory. And so if I say something like that, my sister will argue till the cows come home that my mother never ever said that. Her memories, she only remembers good things. My brother's the same way. He never remembers bad things. But then again, he had a better high school than I did. His high school career, he was a president of of his class. He was a member of the honor society. Oh, good stuff, And that's all he remembers is the good stuff. But the funny thing is that he didn't go to his 50th class reunion, and I did. I know, it's strange. I mean, he had such a good time. He was president of the class, and he didn't even go to his 50th class reunion. But I did. And I had a shitty time in high school. I was a little shit in high school, according to my mother. So you can implant all these negative ideas, and sometimes, of course, you can, of course, they'll forget some of the traumatic events. Asking participants to imagine events that never occurred, of course. You can, once they start imagining it, all of a sudden it becomes real. You can doctor family photographs to make them see what happens. The reality is, a lot of times we don't really remember what happens. We see photographs of ourselves and we go, oh yeah, I remember that. Or you don't remember that, but you remember that snapshot. You remember that picture. Exactly. Merely imagining or viewing a photo associated with a fabricated event can dramatically increase the rate of false memories, even when the event is completely implausible. And the reason is because you can't refute a photograph. And so now that we have, what is this, Apple, we can doctor photographs really easily, can't we? Can't you do that? What do they call it? Apple something? We can do that. We can doctor all these photographs up. So you see this stuff on the internet all the time. During the last election, they showed a picture of Osama bin Laden shaking hands with Hillary Clinton, and it looked kind of almost just about real. It wasn't. She was shaking hands with somebody else, and they.
Or Trump, the Ku Klux Klan parents.
Oh,
Have you seen that one?
I know I have.
At the very beginning of the whole presidency.
I'm sure.
I
That's
was like, what the heck? It's too far.
And Trump actually repeated some of these conspiracy theories. He claimed that Ted Cruz's father was in on the Kennedy assassination. My God, where do you come up with this stuff? But you can see doctored photographs all the time. The act of imagining may make the event even seem more familiar, but that familiarity is mistakenly related to childhood memories rather than to the act of imagination itself. So you can actually doctor up photographs and show stuff that didn't actually exist. Memories, where do they come from? Are they absolute? And the answer is no, they're not, because we try to make them as painless as possible. We try to make them as positive as far as we are concerned as possible. And this may be one of the reasons why Brett Kavanaugh won't admit that he was a drunk and a potential molester in high school. He has rejected that portion of his life. He sees himself as the guy that worked really, really hard, not the guy that got drunk on Friday and Saturday night when he was at Yale. He doesn't see himself that way. And since he doesn't see himself that way, he doesn't remember that stuff. And that's a possibility. We can adjust our memories any way that we want. I will always turn out to be the hero. I will never turn out to be the bad guy. I may be the goat, but I'll never be the bad guy. Okay, so we can adjust that in our own brains. Unfortunately, of course, without corroboration, it is very hard to know which distant memories are true and which were implanted via suggestion. And this is very difficult. We've proven that this is true, that we can implant false memories in somebody's head. Accusations that arise from recovered memories sometimes result in litigation, although note that at times prosecutors have decided not to pursue cases based solely on repressed memory because of the high burden for admissibility of testimony based on repressed memories. We had a case like this up at Fort Belknap. There were select grandchildren were accusing their grandfather of abusing them, of molesting them. And nobody could believe it. This was a leader in the tribe. He went to all the powwows. He was a powwow dancer. He got to carry the Eagle staff on frequent occasions. Nobody could believe that this guy molested his grandchildren. Well, what happened was they had decided that they were going to go see a counselor down in Billings. And the counselor got into all these repressed memories. And so the strange thing was that not only, according to this counselor, not only did this child have a repressed memory of the grandfather molesting them, but there were two other children that had the same repressed memories. That was the bizarre part. But they decided to prosecute. The prosecutors decided to prosecute because it was, the molestation was evidently relatively severe. And because of that, of course, he was taken to court. The family became estranged from itself. This is a grandfather, so it was the parents and the grandchildren were all rejecting this select individual because of the whole situation, because of all of this stuff. He still lives on the reservation, but nobody has anything to do with him. He doesn't dance anymore. He doesn't go to any of the community things. He was convicted through these repressed memories, and it was a couple of years ago. I was there 17 years ago, and this happened like the third year I was there. A couple of years ago, they admitted, the counselor admitted that they were the same repressed memories, that he had implanted them. He had just realized that he had implanted them, and so they were all completely fabricated. And he did suggestive questioning with these children, and he implanted these memories, and they were all the same memory. That was the strange part. But it was able to go through court. Of course, it went through federal court because, well, it was on the reservation. So it was a mess. Some accusers have retracted their claims of repressed memories for abuse. His wife had ALS, and she died before he was exonerated, which was kind of sad. Anyway, parents have sued therapists who use memory recovery techniques to help their adult children recover supposedly repressed memories of child sexual abuse. The claims in these malpractice lawsuits usually take the following form. The abuse either never occurred, the therapist created and implanted false memories of abuse, though their use of memory retrieval, through their use of memory retrieval techniques, clients ultimately came to believe the false memories and accused the alleged accuser. And this is what happened with the case I was just referring to. He implanted all the same memories in all three of these children. And since all three of them had the same memory, they thought it was probable that it was real. But as it turned out, he implanted all three of the memories in all three of the children. And that is the end of the chapter. Why don't we stop right here? I think this is chapter, what is it? 5? Thank you. So I'm not caught up yet. Okay, this is the 7th week. If